Sejam bem-vindos ao Pretzel Talks. Esse é um projeto criado pela Sinagoga Beth-El, com patrocínio do XP Investimentos, Grupo Rossetti, Invista, e também o apoio institucional da Associação dos Amigos da Universidade Hebreia de Jerusalém, Clube Hebraica e o Museu Hebraico de São Paulo. Eu tenho o prazer hoje de conversar com o Remy Pérez, filho de Shimon Peres, mas com uma história própria, como vocês vão descobrir ao longo do nosso papo. É uma honra e um prazer tê-lo aqui. Remy, pleasure to having you here. Really honored. You're such a great guy, and I really appreciate you. And your father legacy is so amazing. Not just your father. People will know more about your grandfather, about your family. So I will start asking you about your grandfather and the war and the stories there, and then to your father and the building of Israel. Can you tell us about this story?
Sure. Thank you so much, Bernardo. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be back at the Hebraica, even though now it's virtually, not physically. I hope to visit soon. And thank you very much for the kind introduction and the kind note. And how do you like me to start? You want me to start telling you about my grandfather, or?
Yes. Let's start with your grandfather, please.
Okay, so basically I had two grandfathers. My grandfather, Rebbe Tzvi, my grandfather that you're talking about, I assume is Ketzel, Yitzhak Persky, my father's father. He joined the British Army to fight with them against the Nazis in the Second World War. He was captured with British soldiers when they were on a boat making their way from Greece to Turkey. They were attacked by the Luftwaffe. After 2 years of surviving in Greece, and they were brought to a prisoners of war camp, not far away from Auschwitz, actually adjacent to Auschwitz. And he made some friends in the prison. One of them in specific was Captain Charles Coward from the British Army. And they tried to escape the camp for 5 times, and they were captured. While they were there, they managed to save a lot of Jewish people that were marching to the crematorium to be executed. They had a plan. They were actually lying in the ditches next to the road to the crematorium. And whenever they saw Jewish people marching towards their death, they would snap them one by one into the ditch and roll over people that were already dead, Jewish people that were already dead. They replaced the bodies with live people. And they managed to save about 400 people like that. In the last attempt, my grandfather was about to be executed by the Germans. They did not know he was Jewish because he was part of the British Army. He was escaping with a train, and they were captured. And since people thought that they were Christian, there was a reverend passing through, and the person that was with my grandfather wanted to have a last confession before he's executed, and they offered it also to my grandfather. And the reverend was very brave. He was an Australian reverend, and he said to the German officer, "You cannot execute them here. You need to bring them back to the prison and have a trial. And then if you want to execute them, you can do it, but you have to do it in a properly way. So they were brought back to the camp, back to the prisoners of war camp. And thank God he managed to escape this destiny. He had very good relationships with the commander of the camp. And he used to provide him with cigarettes and chocolates. So they spare his life, and he survived. And actually, just a few weeks ago, I received a letter that he wrote to my family, to his wife, actually, to Sarah, in it was April 2nd, 1945, just as they liberate them. And in his letter, he says, I miss you a lot. Until that time, my family did not know if he was alive or not, because they didn't hear from him for a few years. And he said, I learned that Shimon, my father, is about to get married. I don't know the bride, but he said, we are free and I'm going to see you soon. And they reunited. Many years later, Charles Coward, the captain from the British Army, needed some support. Financially, he was not in a good shape. So he contacted my father, who was at that time Minister of Defense. And we invited him to come to Israel and to meet my grandfather. And for 3 days, the two of them were reunited. And for 3 days, they did not stop talking about the days in the camp. When he arrived, those survivors that he and my grandfather saved, the 400 people, their families came to see him. And they were standing in the garden next to the building where my grandfather lived, and they were clapping their hands when he was there for many minutes. They called him the Count of Auschwitz. Later on, there was a book written about their story, which is called The Password is Courage. And also there was a film made in Hollywood about the story of Captain Charles Coward. And of course, my grandfather is part of that story. So he was a very special man, very strong, very tall. And he was a wood dealer in his early days. And when he came back to live in Israel, he opened a business in Tel Aviv. And when I was a child, I used to go in the summer to work for him during the summer vacations. And he passed away when he was 87. And I always remember him fondly. So he was a very brave man, and his stories from the war, the Second World War, will remain with me forever.
So amazing story. I never saw the movie. I'm very curious to watch one day. Talking about Hollywood, I realized that you guys were related to Lauren Bacall. Am I right?
That's true. I mean, if you take a good look at me, you see the beauty goes in the family. No, but it's Lauren Bacall was part of the Persky family, and she was part of Vishniva. And so story has it that she is a member of our family, sort of a cousin of us. But I never had an opportunity, of course, to meet her. But it's true. Yeah, she was part of the family.
Yeah, and how was your father involved with the project of building Israel? So how he got involved and the people he was related at the time, how was that?
So when he was very young, he became one of the leaders of a movement that was supporting Ben-Gurion. And Ben-Gurion heard about him, and basically one day he was traveling from Tel Aviv to Haifa, and someone who knew Ben-Gurion very well and my father suggested that my father would join him for the ride. So my father was very excited to meet with Ben-Gurion. He admired him. And he always talked about their joint ride from Tel Aviv to Haifa. But he said once he got into the car, Ben-Gurion turned his back to him and fell asleep. And only when they got to Haifa, he woke up and he looked at my father and he said, Lenin was not a real leader. So my father was very surprised. And he said, why? He said, I don't understand the way he made decisions. If it's war, you have to fight. And if it's peace, it's peace. So that was the first meeting. But I think Ben-Gurion heard about him and heard about this young man and heard about his capabilities and actually had a good eye to identify talent and invited him to work with him. My father at that time was in a kibbutz, Alumot. He was one of the founders of the kibbutz. He was very young. And so Ben-Gurion sent a letter to the head of the kibbutz, and he said, I would like you to assign Shimon to work with me in the defense office. See that as one of the branches of the kibbutz. See his work in defense and military as if he's filling his duty in the kibbutz, and send him over. And ever since, my father was working with him very closely. A lot of people ask Ben-Gurion, why is it that young Mr. Peres is so close to you and your door is always open for him? So he said, I knew every time Mr. Peres stepped into my office, I knew that three things will happen. First of all, he will not ask anything for himself. Secondly, he would not badmouth anybody else. And thirdly, he will always have a great, fresh idea to do something new. And this is why Ben-Gurion kept the door open for him. My father admired him as a leader. He thought he was one of the greatest Jewish leaders. And he admired his vision, his ability to see to the far. He's completely dedicated to the foundation of the state of Israel. When he wanted to learn about democracy, he did not settle for just reading books that were translated, but he learned Old Greece in order to read the books in their origin and not as a translation. So he was really a very special person.
Your father was involved with the defense and then foreign affairs. So how different was for him in stages of his career and ways of thinking, how this transformed him during the process?
So there are certain guidelines that he adopted in his life and shared later on with many people, including, of course, myself. He decided to do several things. He decided, first of all, to serve something which is greater than himself. He decided to serve the country and give his life to the service of the country. And he would always use optimism and creativity and innovative way of thinking to achieve things, especially because he was very, very young. And the country was very young. So you had to really improvise in so many ways to achieve things and to get things done. So when he started, Ben-Gurion asked him to serve the country by building its defense industry. And so most of his life was dedicated to the Israeli defense, and not only the military, but also the defense industry. So he was, at the beginning, he was the head of the Navy services. And then he was assigned in the Ministry of Defense, initially as the Deputy Director General, later on as the Director General, later on as the Deputy Minister of Defense, and then Minister of Defense. And in his career, he did some great projects. The first and most important is building the Israeli nuclear facility. When the British and the French asked Israel to start a war with Egypt in order to open the Suez Canal, and Ben-Gurion did not want to start a war, he and my father traveled to meet the Prime Minister and the President of the UK and France. And when they agreed on the operation, my father told Ben-Gurion, now it's the time to get a nuclear facility agreement from the French. So he used that 56 war as a platform to receive our nuclear technology. And as a young man, he negotiated with the French on getting a nuclear technology and facility to build in Israel. And he experienced some obstacles, significant obstacles. First of all, everyone was against this project. They thought it was crazy and that it will not go through the approval of the superpowers, namely US and Russia. And it was very hard to build it quietly. It was probably the most bold operation in Israel. It was done without government funding. It was done secretly and very successfully. And there was a time where the French government, just before signing and granting us the nuclear facility, the government convened, and actually the opposition managed to take them down. And my father was standing with the agreement in hand, hoping that the prime minister will sign it before the government falls. But unfortunately, the government fell. So the following day, he came back to see the former prime minister and convinced them to sign the papers backdated for yesterday, when he was still prime minister, which he agreed to do. And then there was another obstacle. The French said, we cannot sell you uranium. We can give you the nuclear facility, but not uranium. So my father said, we don't need to buy uranium. And they said, what do you mean? And he said, we'll just borrow the uranium. We'll keep it with us. Whenever you need it, you can call us and we'll bring it back. So the French government agreed not to sell, but to borrow, to lend the uranium. So he was very creative in many ways. He thought that Israel needs to control the sky and space. So he founded the Israeli aerospace industries and brought Israel into the age of space and missiles. And I think his dedication to build the defense industry really allowed Israel to grow and to get strong and have a deterrence that will allow it to survive in a very hostile environment. So that was the first service that he had in his life. The second one, when he was prime minister, he inherited an economy that was imploding. The Israeli economy was really a socialist one, and you cannot really sustain an economy in such a small country that has no natural resources. The inflation rate was skyrocketing to 450%. So in 1 year, he went through a program of stabilizing the Israeli economy and bring down the inflation rate to zero. But more importantly, he turned the Israeli economy into what is called a startup nation, meaning that they invited global enterprises to come to set up a shop in Israel, and at the same time create a platform to encourage startup companies and basically help to build the economy that will be based on innovation. So when you think about it, everything in Israel is based on innovation. We settle down with innovation in agriculture, water and energy. We build our defense industry with innovation from nuclear facility to space and cyber. we build our economy based on innovation. And he also believed that peace will be achieved with innovation, meaning that the ability to partner with other countries in the region and change the region into a startup region that is building services and technologies and products for the future and provide new jobs for the young generation in the Middle East. He believed that building peace will be based also on the fact that the startup nation will become an integrated part of a region that will aim to march forward into a better future. So from defense to economy and from economy to peace, he thought that the greatest service he could do for the country is to achieve peace with our neighbors. So he fought for peace, and achieving peace is tougher than fighting a war. A war is simple to start, and it's simple to escalate. But building peace is something that you do step by step, and you do it with your enemies, and you do it not with full agreement. So some of the people in your country will feel that what you do is that you are betraying your country. So the war for peace is much, much tougher than anything else. And he dedicated his life to peace. And for that, he received the Nobel Peace Prize.
So this legacy of peace, that's part of the gene of, I think, of your family. And it's amazing how you connect technology, innovation to peace, and it's part of you. Is what you're building, I think, for the future. So I didn't know, but I realized you were a helicopter pilot. You still flying with helicopters, or
No, I served in the Israeli Air Force for 10 years. I was a Cobra pilot, which is an attack helicopter. And I had my share of flight. I spent many hours in the air. I don't have a sense of urgency to fly again. So at some point in life, I switched my flight experience to commercial flights, flying with El and other international carriers. I have thousands of hours of flight. I have many flights, operational flights. I did my share, and I don't really miss it. From time to time, I would enjoy flying a helicopter, but it's been several years that I've not been practicing flight, even though I think it's like a riding bicycle. I mean, if you put me now in a cockpit, I will manage with no problem. Great. So if you have a helicopter, invite me. I'll come and fly with you.
All right. Maybe we can arrange when you visit Brazil to do so.
Yes, pleasure.
And so, okay, your father set the ground for innovation for the startup nation, and then you started, I think, in '97 to, if I'm not wrong, on the venture capital, on the technology investment side. So could you tell us how was the market at the time? Was before the first bubble? It's just before ICQ. So can you tell us the environment at the time and the stock market, the difference between that time and the present on the startup nation?
Yeah, so basically I started earlier. I started to invest in venture in '92. But before that, when I left the Israeli Air Force, I joined the Israeli aerospace industries in the late '80s, and I was working on the development of the new fighter jet aircraft called Lavi, which at the time was supposed to be the blue and white Israeli-made advanced fighter jet that was supposed to be even better than F-16, with all the avionics and technology that was developed in Israel. And thousands of people worked on this. was a combination of engineers and pilots to build really the best platform. And initially, the government budgeted that project at $900 million, but very soon they discovered that the cost is much, much higher. And at some point in time, in 1987, there was a decision by the government to stop the program because it was too costly, and also the developing a fighter jet lock, stock, and barrel from scratch was too heavy for our economy, and was creating challenges with the Americans because it was an aircraft that would compete with F-16. And so the government decided to stop the project. And so I left the Israeli aerospace industries with thousands of people, highly capable, and they flooded the market. And a lot of them started to think about starting companies. A lot of them did not want to work anymore for an enterprise and be fired. So they wanted to take their own destiny in their hands, so to speak. And so during that time, I joined a software company and I worked there for a few years. And in my capacity, I met with a lot of those young startup companies, but there were no venture funds in Israel at that time. And so I decided to set up a venture fund, but nobody wanted to invest in Israel. And so the only way for me to raise money was actually to create a company and raise money in the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. I started with a small amount, $7 million that I raised, and I started to invest in startup companies. And it was very successful. All of a sudden, it became successful. So in 96, 97, together with my co-founder, Rami Kalish, we joined forces to establish our second fund together. And that was the beginning of what is called Pitango now. And it was the first fund to raise money without government support. It was the first fund to raise more than $100 million. But the market at that time was very naive. It was the beginning of the internet. And our initial success was based on the fact that people thought that the internet market would change the world. And they were right, but it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. And when they discovered it doesn't happen overnight, in 2000, the stock market crashed and collapsed, and a lot of companies vanished. And among those first companies to introduce the internet market, we invested in several of them. We invested in VocalTech, which was the company that invented voice over IP, what we use when we do voice in our mobile phones or Wi-Fi networks. And ICQ, as you mentioned, Yossi Vardi was a venture partner in Pitango. Unfortunately, it was impossible to invest in the company at that time. He did allow us to invest personally some money, but we could not bring the fund into it. So it was a successful acquisition. But those were early days where the idea was that Israeli founders and funds can take companies to a certain distance, and at some point in time we have to sell it to somebody else who has the funds, who has the ability, the experience on growing companies. Those were the first days. But nowadays, of course, Pitango is managing very large funds. We just raised $750 million. Now we can build companies for the long run. We don't sell them. We basically grow them to an IPO to become category leaders. And today in Israel, we have close to 100 unicorns. Pitango has 10 unicorns, and we have companies going public now. So those are very different days from the previous days. People discovered that Israelis can do more than just innovate. We can actually build companies. We can build products. We know how to manage. We are not short-sighted. And I think that the future for the Israeli ecosystem in the next 10 years after COVID-19, where the demand for innovation and the adoption rate has accelerated, I think is unprecedented. We're going to see amazing companies coming from Israel, and we want to be part of it.
So coming to the next step on the trajectory of Pitango, so you have the burst. So first I will ask you how the burst affect Pitango and personally your life, because it was a major event in the investment arena. And let's talk about the 2000 to 2010. I think Israel was too much focused on telecom. Am I right? And it was difficult after the burst. So why 2000 to 2010 wasn't that good for Israeli startups, as you see now?
Yeah, you have to remember that the Israeli innovation entrepreneurship ecosystem with venture capital really started at the beginning of the 90s. And as we were building our ecosystem, we hit a major crisis in 2000 when the stock market crashed and a lot of companies died. And also a lot of Israeli companies were developing products in the telecom space, and the telecom space was also crashing with the dot-com. And so we went through a major crisis in 2000 that took time to recover. When we started to recover, we had another crisis, which is the subprime, the global financial crunch that took place in 2007, 2008. So if the 90s were very attractive for IPOs based on the promise of the internet, the next decade was much more difficult and complicated because we experienced two big crises, 2000 and 2007 and 8. But between 2000 and 2008, we learned that in order to build companies, it's not enough to have a great story or great technology. You need to have a business model. You need to have people that are savvy in marketing and sales, that have business experience. And you need more funding in order to scale those companies. They need to raise more money before they can scale and become public companies. So all that has changed towards 2010. And basically, the internet was really fulfilling its promise. The world became much more connected. A lot of things started to be much more automated. And it was a blessing for Israel because we live in a small country that is far away from the market. We don't have a local market. We don't have a regional market. So we had to connect to the global markets. And the internet for us was like, it was like the sail that allowed us to become like a boat. We can sail the ocean. It was fulfilling the wind of the businesses. And so our ability to connect through the internet and market our products, distribute our software, and get into remote markets allowed us to scale our companies faster. So a lot of Israeli companies started to master the platform of internet. We know how to leverage it for marketing and for sales and for distribution. And so the last decade, basically from 2010 to 2020, was actually the best decade we had, because during this decade, there was a cultural change from a country that is building small companies with technology for sale. It became a country that is building unicorns that are category leaders, because now we have the funds and we have the platform to scale. And that really allows us to build our economy. So now when you look at Israel, you would see that the biggest Israeli companies are technology companies. We have technology companies that are traded at valuations of north of $15 billion. We have companies that are generating hundreds and billions of dollars in revenues. So there is a boost that we injected into the Israeli ecosystem. And what you saw in the last decade is that the level of investment in Israel in startup companies actually grew from about 2 billion a year in 2012 to 10 billion a year in 2020. And COVID-19 started to accelerate that because the world started to understand that we need to be more digital, we need to be more entrepreneurial in order to survive a pandemic or a global threat. And everybody started to move online for shopping, for health, for e-learning. And so we experienced tremendous growth. And as a matter of fact, in the first quarter of 2021, the investment in Israel was over $5 billion. So if in 2020, throughout the year, we saw 10 billion invested in Israeli companies, just in the first quarter, 5 billion, more than 5 billion. So we are now at the pace of 20 billion a year. If you compare it to 2012, it's going to be 10 times more this year than what we saw in 2012. So 10x growth in less than a decade is very impressive.
So just to give an idea to our audience, how much do you guys in Pitango have under management? And the second part of the question, I think one of the most important drivers of technology growth will be 5G and AI, and you guys are very well positioned. So how do you visualize this as a trend? Because you started just after the crisis of 2008, you started to foresee this future and position Pitango for that. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. We saw the trend in the beginning of 2012. We saw the trend that actually we understood that the market is exploding in two areas. We understood that companies are going to sustain as private companies and not being sold to strategic players and go for growth. And so it was clear to us that there will be an opportunity to invest at growth stage. That was one. Secondly, we felt that the young generation is preferring to start companies rather than work in incumbent companies. So we figured out that there will be an explosion in the seed and early stage phase as well. So we thought that running a fund that does seed stage and growth together doesn't make sense. So in 2012, we decided to turn Pitango into a platform of partnership that is managing parallel funds and have the partners focus on different sectors. So the first move was to build our growth fund. The second move was to build our seed stage fund and separate healthcare from it, because we also felt that healthcare is becoming a big opportunity now that it's going through transformation, especially with COVID-19. So today, Pitango is managing 3 funds in parallel. One is doing healthcare, one is doing seed stage cutting edge technologies, the other one is doing growth. And we just concluded fundraising of 750 million for these 3 funds. And we're building now amazing companies. And we have dedicated teams that focus on these 3 big opportunities that we see. And it allows us to really invest in something like 25 new companies every year now. That's the pace. Whereas last decade, we were less than 10 companies a year. Now it's 25 companies a year, but still the bar is very high because we're focusing on 3 different markets: growth, seed IT, and healthcare. And I think that if you look at the next decade is going to be a decade of breaking the glass ceiling in terms of valuations, in terms of revenue generation. You're going to see some amazing companies coming out of Israel. We focus, of course, Israel excelled in cybersecurity technologies. When we reach the point of AI, which is now taking the place of the software industry, we figured out that we are among the 3 top markets in the world. But going forward, we have to work very hard in order to keep the first row in innovation. And we are now looking at the new frontiers, such as quantum computing technologies, things that are cutting edge technologies that are going to change completely the world of computation and communication. So I'm very excited about the next decade. I think also the world learned to use technology more than ever before. So the world is ready to absorb innovation. Companies are ready to scale. One of the things we are doing is we're investing in companies which are building platforms for developers. We are empowering the developers. They are becoming the most important people in the ecosystem, those who can develop artificial intelligence, machine learning, quantum computing. They will become the driving force of the industry. And so we're investing in companies that are empowering them. So that's what we do right now.
So mixing these technologies, quantum computing, with the healthcare arm now on the fund, do you foresee one of your startups finding the cure for cancer or something like that? So what's most exciting on the healthcare side?
On the healthcare side, what is exciting is the fact that that industry, which is broken, is going through a major transformation. The system, the healthcare system, is actually following the US system. And the US system is quite broken in terms of insurance, in terms of who is paying for the treatment, how you get paid for the treatment. And the industry now is making a lot of shifts. First of all, the digital phase or the digital transformation is entering the healthcare system. There's much more data exists today in healthcare than before, and it's going to be leveraged significantly. For example, you can use data to predict the situation of a patient. You can do telehealth and telemedicine, giving people treatments without them physically meeting the physician, and it works amazingly well. The healthcare market is going through paying for outcome and not for procedures. The fact that I went through a procedure or I'm paying for a drug is no longer accepted if there is no result. So the whole system, the whole healthcare system is moving towards outcome payment. They want to see people paying for an outcome. If you cured me, I will pay. If you just did a process but nothing happened, I'm less willing to pay. And also we're trying to pull people out of hospitals. So including, of course, the aging population. One of the biggest areas is aging in place, where people can age at home and they can get the treatment at home. There's a lot of new technologies that will cure a lot of the diseases. We have companies in genomic sequencing. We have companies that are building platform for drugs discovery. We'll be able to discover, to develop drugs much faster. I think one of the most significant demonstration was vaccination for COVID-19. Imagine that in less than 12 months, we got vaccination. We are now have more than 1 billion people vaccinated around the world. I know now that the US president decided not only to vaccinate the US, but to try and vaccinate the entire world, saying that basically it ain't over anywhere until it's over everywhere. So the attempt now is to really vaccinate every person around the world. So coming up with a solution in less than a year, instead of 15 years of development, I think it's outstanding. Sometimes we don't appreciate how fast innovation is moving forward because we are becoming less sensitive because things are happening so fast. We expect them to happen. But when you think about it, it's just unprecedented to come up with a vaccination that is working so well, so quickly. And the world is learning how to deal with it. Now, I think the biggest thing is that the world is moved because we are becoming more driven by technology and innovation. More countries can fulfill their scarcities with innovation. If you don't have energy, you can extract energy from the sun. If you don't have clean water, you can desalinate the water of the sea. If you don't have land, you can grow crops in the air. So we are not dependent on natural resources anymore, which takes away the need for countries to fight each other. We don't need to conquer land or natural resources. So we're fading out from the world of wars, but we are entering a world of threats, global threats. And so we will less fight each other. We will more work shoulder to shoulder to mitigate global threats. COVID-19 was a perfect demonstration how the whole world was attacked at the same time with no discrimination. And our ability to prevail was completely dependent on science, technology, innovation, connectivity, internet, the fact that we could understand very quickly how the genome of the virus is structured. We could develop very quickly vaccination. We could develop very quickly measures how to address it. We were physically became islanders, but digitally we continued the globalization and the cooperation. Now, if you take away internet and communication and technology, we would see probably the whole world would be contracted and hundreds of millions of people would lose their lives. As a matter of fact, for the first time in human history, the world sacrificed its economy to save lives. When you think about it, it's exactly the opposite of Second World War. We started with my grandfather, right? In Second World War, the world spent billions and billions of dollars in order to develop machines to kill each other. 100 years later, or less than 100 years later, we're actually spending billions and billions of dollars in order to save lives. I think this is a very significant transition or transformation that we see from the past into the future. So innovation is the platform upon which we will be able to mitigate global threats, and we will move from a world of wars against each other to a world of collaboration with one another to address those threats. And it's climate change, cyber, inequalities, movements of people, and there's so many threats that are evolving that we have to mitigate.
So coming back to the tradition of Paris family with innovation and peace. So tell us about the Institute and how big do you dream of peace in the world? How do you get involved with that? So what's your vision for that and what drives you in the Institute?
So the Paris Center for Peace and Innovation, which is the institution that I'm chairing and I'm continuing my father's work and legacy, is a very unique institution because it focuses on the future, not on the past. We're not a museum. We don't try to remember my father as he was, but rather thinking about the future that he envisioned. And so my father saw a world that is moving from a world of wars into a world of collaboration to address global threats. He saw technology as the main empowerment of humankind. He thought that science and technology will allow and empower individuals to create a significant impact on our lives. He saw the creation of the new enterprises as the new empires, and big corporations will work in order to not only grow financially, but they will become the next leaders of the world. And they will have to assume responsibility for the environment, for humankind, for people. And so he saw also a shift of governance from governments to private enterprises. And so with that, what we see our role is to inspire the young generation to be much more adaptive to new technologies, to be much more entrepreneurs, to understand that the world is changing very fast, that we are dependent on each other, so we need to collaborate with other countries. We cannot be in a state of war because it doesn't make sense anymore. We have to reach out and work together on shaping a new tomorrow. He said that trying to change the past doesn't work. The past is unchangeable. The only thing you can shape is the future. So the center is focused on shaping a new tomorrow, shaping a new future. Originally, it was established in order to privatize the peace process. He thought that the peace process should not be left only to the political leaders. It should be handed over to the people. So we do a lot of projects between Israelis and Palestinians, joint projects where they get to know each other, work together, build something together. Initially, those projects were around agriculture, trade, culture, sports, music, everything. But nowadays, we put a special effort on having projects based on science, technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. We have a program which is called Starting Up Together, where Jews and Arabs are starting businesses and social enterprises together. We are working with our neighbors to build incubators. We are working on subcontracting work of global enterprises and Israeli companies in the Palestinian authorities. We do internship programs for Palestinians in Israeli companies. We try to work with our neighbors on the idea is that in the Middle East, you have to move forward, you have to create new jobs, that the power of oil and gas is vanishing. It's part of the ancient world. The new world is more on clean and renewable energy, and it's more on software and data. We tell them that the empires of today are technology empires. It is happening in the US, it is happening in China, it is happening in Israel. It happens everywhere, where the technology companies are becoming the drivers of the economy and the value creators. And we tell them that if we work together, we can shape tomorrow. And if we shape tomorrow together, then we can settle down and solve the problems of the past. But if we think about the past and try to change it, there is no future. Nothing will happen. And so the Paris Center is a future-looking institution. We focus on, as I said, empowering the young generation. We ask them to dream big, to collaborate, to reach out, and to take their destiny in their hands. And we are telling them that the sword is giving way to the computer and to the software. With a sword, you could kill. With computers, you can heal, you can cure. and combine the idea of peace building with entrepreneurship and innovation. It allows us to attract the young generation. It allows us to open the minds to the idea of peace, because if you talk only about peace, you talk about politics. If you talk about politics, you are talking about right, left. If you're talking about innovation, you're talking about forward, backwards. So we do peace movements not by right, left. We do peace movement by forward and not backwards.
Much wisdom in what you said. I learned a lot. Amazing.
Thank you.
We're running out of time. I have one last question. So,
sure.
We Brazilians, Jewish community, how do you see Brazil and Israel collaborating more for this better future? What's your suggestion for us to get more involved and be part of this impact?
So, first of all, I would say that come and visit us. One of the things we do at the Paris Center, we also work on bringing the Jewish people together around the concept of innovation and entrepreneurship. We say that Jews need not judge Israel only on the merits of political issues or religious issues, but rather on the idea that we work on tikkun olam, on repairing the world with technology and innovation. But this year, after COVID-19, we added another layer of value, which is solidarity. We are standing together, we're falling together. So you can be part of what Israel does. As Bernardo, as you know better than many others, be supportive of the things that we do. Invest in Israeli technology, invest in Israeli innovation, help Israeli companies reach out partners and customers in Brazil, in Latin America in general. Help us augment and amplify what we do in Israel by being in touch, by being involved, by being engaged, by helping us grow the Israeli companies and keeping Israel in the forefront of science and technology, and help us open the markets. If you do that, and you are doing it, we cannot ask for more. And we believe that connecting us on the merits of these ideas and spreading what we do and visiting us and seeing what we do, that's the best way for us to move forward together.
So, Remy, I cannot thank you enough for your kindness. I learned so much with this conversation. I'm sorry that we have 1 hour, but I'm honored. It's a pleasure. I hope to see you in person soon. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
And count on us in Brazil to do whatever to support and help this beautiful dream. I'm very honored to be somehow around and watch your accomplishments. I'm very honored. I'm very proud of you.
Thank you so much, Roberto. Hey, Bernardo. It's very much done thanks to your support, and we appreciate it. We don't take it for granted. And only with the support of such great partners, we can do what we do. And still, we feel that we're in the beginning, and we feel that the next 10 years are going to be even more exciting than everything that we've seen in the last 30 years. So we can't wait to see it.
Thank you. I will say some words in Portuguese just to finalize. So, pessoal, muito obrigado. Espero que vocês tenham gostado. Uma história linda, uma família que ajudou a construir o passado, o presente e o futuro de Israel. É uma honra e muito obrigado pela audiência de vocês.
Obrigado.